Mr. President, the Democratic leader has just outlined the issue that's before us today, and I want to put it into some context. The first thing I want to say is that what we're talking about today is the most fundamental of American economic principles: free market competition. Free market competition is what we're talking about here. Now, as the Democratic leader outlined, for 130 years, our electrical system worked basically in the same way that it works today. It's worked because of central power plants, wires, distribution and transmission system, and homes. Homes and businesses and offices were the passive receptors of electricity, and the utilities have done a wonderful job. I've worked with them over the years. They have done a complex job where the power has to be there when the switch is thrown, and they've done a terrific job of serving the American public. But what the American public wants is not necessarily electricity itself. It wants what electricity can do. A friend of mine once said, for example, that in this country every year 5 million people buy quarter-inch drills. But nobody wants quarter-inch drills. What they want are holes. What the American people want is microwaves and televisions and computers and electricity and hot water in their homes. And how that power comes is really not what they're concerned with. But they do want options. A revolution has occurred. This system served us well, without doubt, for 130 years. But a revolution has occurred in the last 25 years, and this chart dramatically shows what's happened. This is the price of a watt of solar energy. In the 70s, it was $76. Today, it's 36 cents. This is revolutionary. This is disruptive. This is change. And what this has enabled is for us to now tap into that very large, fully permitted nuclear fusion device in the sky that delivers power wirelessly to every city, town, village, and hamlet on Earth. That's what we're talking about here. Why is this important? Well, for a number of reasons. If you combine the cheaper solar power with smart appliances that can use their power only when it's most efficacious for the grid, smart meters that many of our grids now have, demand response that allow customers to diminish their demand at times of high demand on the grid, and new storage technologies, if you add all those together, it's an entirely new world of electricity development. This is where we are today. We still have central power plants, we still have wires, but we have homes and businesses making their own electricity and storing their own electricity from that big nuclear fusion plant up in the sky. This is a good development. Number one, it empowers consumers, it empowers families. The Democratic leader.
It's also true, is it not, as we speak, there's tremendous work being done on battery storage that will change it even more. Is that right?
That's absolutely correct. And that, I'll touch on in a moment, changes the relationship potentially with utilities and with the grid system. This is a good thing. This provides competition. Our whole system is based upon competition. Everybody here talks about the power of the market. And that's what we're talking about here. It strengthens the grid by making it more resilient because power is going in two directions. We had a huge ice storm in Maine in 1998. The power went off. Everybody lost their power, 600,000 people. The people who had generators in their homes could make their own power, but that was very few people. Now we're talking about a grid that's not wholly dependent upon a central power plant, but power goes in both directions. I'm on the Intelligence and Armed Services Committee. This is a national security issue. One of the great vulnerabilities of this country is a cyber attack on critical infrastructure. To the extent this infrastructure is self-healing and distributed, it is less subject to a catastrophic attack. It saves money because it saves money on distribution and power plants. if people are making their own investments and you don't need the level of transmission and distribution wires. And of course, it could substantially reduce our dependency upon fossil fuels. Now, there are two possible reactions to this from the utility companies. One is to adopt, adjust, and reinvent themselves, as companies have done. I remember New England Tel. New England Tel is now Verizon. If they were still focused exclusively on landlines with the old black telephones, they'd be long gone. Instead, they reinvented themselves because of a change of technology, and now they're one of the nation's leading wireless providers. AT&T used to be Ma Bell. Now, it's a leading wireless provider because they adapted and they changed their whole business model based upon new economic realities. That's one option. And there are utilities in the country that are adopting that option, that are finding new business models, relationships with their customers in order to participate in this system and be counselors and energy providers and consultants to their customers in this new world. On the other hand, they can fight, resist, try to delay, and that's what we're really talking about here today. That's what's happened in Nevada, imposing high fixed fees that ostensibly are to recover the cost, but everybody knows that the real purpose is to strangle this industry in its infancy. Now, those companies, I think, should think about the examples of Packard and Kodak and Polaroid, who failed to adopt, who failed to take account of new technological realities and ultimately failed. And I don't think that's the future that these companies want. This amendment is not a federal takeover of state utility regulations. It provides guidance. It uses the term take into account. All it says is that if you're going to change a net metering regime or if you're going to impose fees, they have to be based upon data and analysis, not arbitrary fees that are really designed to strangle the industry. It is not a mandate for net metering or any other kind of payment. Again, what we're trying to do is make sure that the benefits to the grid from a home installation, whether it's demand response, storage, or whatever, are measured as well as the cost. The issue is very simple. It's fair compensation to the customer for the energy they produce or save, and fair compensation to the utility for maintaining the grid. I know that there are costs to the utility for maintaining the grid, and they've got to be fairly compensated. But the question is fair. What is the right number? And an arbitrary, exorbitant fee that essentially makes the development of solar or storage unfeasible is not the right number. The Democratic leader mentioned storage, and this is really an essential part of this discussion. As storage technology improves, here's where the utilities are most exposed. In my view, utilities are in a race with battery technology in order to determine who is going to provide the backup to the solar, wind, demand response facilities in the house. Who is going to provide the backup? If the utilities insist upon high, unreasonable fees, eventually, and I think eventually is within 5 years, it's not 10, 20, 30 years, eventually people are going to say, I'm going to do my own storage, my own backup in my basement, and cut the wires. And then the utility has lost the customer altogether. I don't think that makes any sense. The real point is change is coming anyway. The only question is whether it happens fairly, deliberately, and expeditiously, and is fair to the customers as well as the utilities, or whether it goes through a long series of individual fights, state by state. The Democratic
yield for question. I'm wondering if my friend is aware of a couple of examples. In Nevada, Tesla, the Elon Musk massive company who he's building batteries for his vehicles and other things. The Tesla plant, I toured that a few months ago. It is under construction, but the floor plan is the only place in America that bigger manufacturing facility is the Boeing plant in Washington. That's how huge it is. And the man that is running that for him indicated to me that they had found the price, as indicated by the Senator from Maine, was so cheap with solar, it's going to basically be mostly solar, nothing else. Was the Senator aware of that?
Absolutely, and I think that's what has to be part of this discussion, because if the utilities insist on fighting and trying to overprice their storage, people are just going to say, I'm going to buy my own storage, put it in the basement, and cut the wires.
And remember, what he is manufacturing in this huge facility is batteries. So I would think that Elon Musk, who has been sending people into space and cargo into space, is going to come up with an idea to make better batteries. I would also suggest to my friend, I think the example of Packard and Kodak is really good examples. But in more modern, I read a book a few months ago where Reed Hastings, the owner of Netflix, who had already been successful in another line of work, and he went into Netflix. We all remember Blockbuster. We would go to rent our movies. Well, he went to Blockbuster. He said, I got an idea. Here's what I'd like to do. They said, no, that's just a niche business. We're not interested. Blockbuster's gone, and Netflix is every place. So the same thing is going to happen one way or the other to these monopolies that have the power in our states. And they should work something out to make sure that they're ahead of the curve. Otherwise, they're going to be behind the curve, and fairly quickly. Would the Senator agree with that?
I would agree, and that's exactly where I would conclude. I am not anti-utility. I am pro-customer. I am pro-competition. I am pro-free markets. I believe that the utilities have a tremendous opportunity here to modify and adapt their business model to maintain their relationship with their customers. But if they do not, then I'm afraid that technological changes such as storage are going to overtake them, and they could go to the way of Kodak, Blockbuster, and Polaroid. And I don't want to see that happen, because I think they have a tremendous value to contribute to this discussion. And I guess I will conclude that this amendment is really a modest one. It is not a takeover of the regulatory process. It simply urges and advocates that the State Public Utilities Commission take into account the positive factors of solar as well as the costs in order to reach a fair compensation agreement as between utilities and their customers. This is the future. It is going to happen. The only question is whether it happens efficiently, fairly, or by fighting. I would prefer the former option. I think this is an important part of the future of this country, and we have an important role to play in this body. I urge the support for this amendment. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.